Hello, everybody. This is some random Neko, waking up from my nap to greet the world for the day. And by greet, I mean show up late to the party yet again, because I only now found the time to play 2.7's main story quest, and compile all my thoughts about it and the overall main story quest of Rinascita into a video. Maybe one day I'll be able to put out a Wuwa video that isn't weeks after the patch I'm talking about is already over, but until then, today is not that day. Now before I begin, a quick disclaimer. This is purely an opinion piece based on my experience as someone who's been playing Wuthering Waves since launch. There was no heavy research or deep dive involved in this video. Everything's coming from my memory and Google searches for double checking purposes, so if I get something wrong, please feel free to correct me as politely and civilly as possible in the comment section down below. 2.7's main story quest, consisting of Act 10 to 11 and a segue, was just alright. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't amazing for what was supposed to be the grand finale of Rinascita. Now before you all burn me at the stake for blasphemy, there were plenty of things in this patch that I enjoyed. Galbrenna and Choyun were amazing additions to Wuwa's roster. Galbrenna is basically Bayonetta, which I absolutely don't mind because she's so freaking cool. And I love how she's a female character who's not thirsty for Rover. She's just an ally with a fascinating backstory, who later becomes a true comrade despite initial misunderstandings. In contrast, Choyun didn't get as much focus as her, but what we do learn about him during the segue has me greatly intrigued and eager to learn more about both him and the organization he belonged to. It also doesn't hurt that he's a male character, with a great skill set in an RPG gacha game, with a skewed gender ratio. As for the main story quest itself, Act 10 was pretty good in terms of setting the stage for the final battle against Leviathan. I love the whole sequence with Avidius finally becoming the hero he wanted to be, and the beautiful storybook sequence with Imperator talking about Rinascita's past and its hopes for the people's futures. Act 11 carried the bulk of the main story, with more build-up to the final battle, the epic showdown itself, and the immediate aftermath. The Avengers Assemble moments were cool to see, and I loved how all the Rinascita characters were involved in the final battle against Leviathan. It was also interesting to see the Grand Architect play a bigger role, and there were so many reveal bombs dropped at the end that will definitely fuel the theorists for months to come, and increase my eagerness to learn more about Rover's past. However, there were a lot of things about the main story quests that were not good, making it feel somewhat unfulfilling as a result. Act 11 was more stuff full of content than a Thanksgiving turkey, but the bloat was time-consuming rather than interesting and informative. Many peak moments felt unearned and shoehorned in, because many characters were forgotten as soon as we moved on to the next area or character banner. Avidius' character journey fell severely short, because the build-up was almost non-existent, so his conclusion didn't give the emotional gut punch he rightfully deserved. Yuno's sacrifice from 2.6 feels cheap and useless, because of how quickly she was able to reintegrate and return to her original dynamic with Augusta without anyone questioning it. And Kuro really couldn't help themselves as they force you to learn about Galbrenna's past by following phantoms once again. Also, the final battle against Leviathan, while amazing, was not as epic as it should have been since Leviathan was basically a reskin of Fleur-de-Lis, which is a huge letdown for what's supposed to be the final boss for Rinascita's main story quest. And I don't know what was going on with the new cutscene format. Sure, it looked more cinematic, but it was so painful to sit through because you couldn't skip or control the pace of dialogue. And for some unknown reason, the dialogue choices were QuickTime events that were super stressful because the countdown barely gave you any time to read the choices, let alone choose them. And they didn't seem to matter in the end anyway, so what was even the point of doing something like this except to give players anxiety? Now besides giving my thoughts on 2.7, I also wanted to express my opinions about the overall main story quest of Rinascita. Despite the highs, lows, and plateaus, I really enjoyed Rinascita's story. It was definitely leagues ahead of the main story quest in Jinzhou, and had better story progression than the Black Shores. But that doesn't mean its execution was all that great. In 2.0, the main story quest encompassed the prologue and Acts 1 to 3, which introduced many key and playable characters and set the stage for the main conflict in Rinascita, with so many conspiracies afoot that you need multiple whiteboards just to keep track of everything. The entire patch was stacked with so much content, and its execution absolutely matched the carnival hype of the epic trailer that made me excited to play Wuwa again. However, things calmed down a bit too much in 2.1, as there was no main story quest to be had, only a well-done companion quest for Brant, and an event quest involving Phoebe. I'm pretty sure the event was also meant to serve as a companion quest for her, but the entire thing would have played out the same even without her, because she's just that uninvolved. And we don't even learn anything new about her, nor does she act any different than usual. This entire patch was just fishing filler with the side of Theater Kid Pirate. Thankfully, things pick back up again in 2.2, as Act 4 starts off strong by delving further into the mystery of Rinascita's history. But now we're getting the divinities involved through their connections with the Phasalias and Cardathia. If 2.0 was stuffed with story, 2.2 was stuffed with lore, and is what I consider the peak patch of the whole bunch, because of its cinematic climax of a boss battle that was absolutely amazing, with battle mechanics that allowed Rover to cycle through the 3 elements they had access to, the epic reveal of Cardathia's past, and the emotional music and dialogue delivery. However, the pace did drag its feet as soon as we got to Avenolium, and the aftermath of the battle against Fleur-de-Lis felt a bit like a cop-out with how quickly it occurred. Regardless, Act 4 was everything I was hoping for after 2.0, as it really showcased the best of Wuwa's storytelling and main quest gameplay chops. But as is quickly becoming a pattern, 2.3 is like 2.1 in that it doesn't include any main story quests, but a well-made companion quest for Zani, and an event quest involving Chakuna. Unlike 2.1 though, the event quest for 2.3 actually made Chakuna feel relevant and also played out more like a main story quest mixed with a companion quest, given how it tied Chakuna's past with the Order's pilgrimages and had Cristoforo involved in its narrative as well. But if we do look at it as a main story quest, then it would feel like an odd reprieve, because it didn't do anything to ease us into 2.4 as we head off to Septimont, where the build-up, setup, and execution of the main story quest began to progress on very shaky ground, as Act 5 didn't feel like a logical continuation of 2.2's Act 4, especially after everything that happened during 2.3's event quest. Cause the reason for why we go to Septimont was absolutely bewildering to me. Like, really, Cardathia? You're just gonna go investigate something potentially dangerous without telling anyone anything? Especially after everything that happened in 2.2? At the very least, the main story quest places an emphasis on stories and controlling the narrative, which plays a key role later on. Unfortunately, this is also when Kuro started earnestly adding companion quest elements to the main story because there were no more companion quests from this point forward. But that was still alright for 2.5, as Act 7 was an amazing quest that engaged the entire community in a massive debate about Rover and Frolova, because Kuro actually committed to having a sympathetic but irredeemable villain, and a hero that wasn't a perfect self-insert but a flawed protagonist. However, the same can't be said for the segue, which was a sort of interlude where we learned about Augusta's rise to the top in Septimont. While it had an interesting gameplay mechanic, it was ultimately useless and a waste of time. Sure, it served as further emphasis on the importance of stories, but we already got enough of that in 2.4. The segue just doesn't add anything useful except a bit of setup literally at the end that could have also happened in the beginning of Act 8 in 2.6. Speaking of 2.6, the main story quest started off strong in Act 8, but it lost its focus for a bit by becoming a companion quest for Augusta, which I didn't enjoy because it felt like I was being forced to learn more about her if I wanted to continue the quest, instead of allowing me to learn more naturally. And Act 9 was even worse, because while we do get a jaw-dropping reveal, it fell flat because of how sudden it was. Then the act became a full-blown companion quest that also low-key felt like a date in the worst location possible. It made the entire quest feel like a slog to get through, especially since I didn't care much for Yuno. Like, I don't know what happened between 2.5 and 2.6, but Kuro must have lost a writer or something, cause unlike 2.5 where it felt natural to learn more about Frolova as the story progressed, 2.6 forced you to learn more about Augusta and Yuno to the point where companion quest elements overtook the main story quest, and took away much needed build-up and explanations for key information and bombshells. Now that I've expressed my thoughts for Rinascita's main story quest, here are some additional thoughts on how I believe it could have been improved. First off, 2.0 did not need to have the lion's share of the acts. Act 3, which was the entirety of the Carnival, could have been put in 2.1 because 2.1's content was more filler than relevant, which made the wait for 2.2 painfully boring. Then in 2.2, the story should have let Cardathia's sacrifice sit for a little longer, like we would need to work through our emotions while learning more about Cardathia's past, before we eventually find Imperator who brings her back with the last of their power as repayment for everything she's done for them, instead of just having Imperator appear immediately after. Then for 2.3, it would have been more fitting for the event quest to be a main story quest instead, or even a segue, because it added relevant context and lore in regards to the Order and its hold on the Raganesi people. Then we'd switch the acts for 2.4 and 2.5, so Act 7 happens in 2.4, and Acts 5 and 6 happens in 2.5. Because Act 7 is what should have happened before we left for Septimont, as we could have confronted Fenrico and Frolova while we were still in Raguna, and the end of the battle against Fenrico would have been a better reason for going to Septimont, since he says he sensed the Dark Tide's presence there. So off we go to investigate after consulting with Cardathea, who's going ahead first because she also sensed something as well, and bam! The main story quest continues with a more logical progression. Also, I really would have preferred Cristoforo to be the one who gives us the book needed to break the loop instead of Frolova, because he's the one who has an obsession with controlling narratives, so it'd make more sense for him to interfere in his own story. As for the segue in 2.5, it should have been a companion quest for Augusta, with its completion being required to progress to Act 8. It could then be used to delve deeper into the political unrest in Septimont that never went anywhere anyways in either 2.4 or 2.6, so why not have it in a companion quest where it could have actually been relevant? And it also could have allowed for more interactions between Augusta and Yuno, which would have made Yuno's sacrifice hit harder because you would have seen more of their dynamic, and thus been struck by how strange it is for Augusta to not have Yuno by her side. Because Augusta deserves a companion quest, as she is everything I wish Malvika was in every single way, and it's a shame she didn't get a dedicated quest that befitted her blazing majesty. Also, the phantom interactions with Kid Augusta in 2.6 should be completely replaced with phantom interactions among NPCs, as it would have better set the scene of the Dark Tide's devastation and influence, while making the search for a way to defeat the false sovereign feel more natural and less individual character focused. Then finally we have 2.7, where the main story quests felt rushed with lots of relevant and much needed content left on the cutting room floor. So the first fix would be to extend the story into the next patch just to give it more room to breathe. Then the segue should be put between Acts 10 and 11, since it shows Choyun's POV of events that happened during Act 10, and would have allowed his farewell to be part of the farewell to Rinascita, because it felt weird to have Chakona tell us what happened despite her not even being there for 90% of it, and to have already left Rinascita before suddenly being back to before we left, just so we could say goodbye to Choyun. And in regards to the farewell, Augusta shouldn't have recognized Galbrenna the moment they met again, as they've changed a lot since they last saw each other as kids. Instead, Augusta would find Galbrenna familiar, but she can't remember how. Then once everything's over, she would offer for Galbrenna to call Septimont home again, hinting that she now recognized her. Galbrenna would be surprised, but then say she doesn't know if she will, but it wouldn't hurt to stop by once in a while to catch up with an old friend, which would have Augusta smiling and saying it's a promise. In addition, Frolova will not be brought back because her reappearance, which also wasn't explained by the way, brought nothing to the story except the possibility of her showing up again later on. And I hate the implication that she finally took Rover's advice about changing, because the whole reason why I loved the clash between her and Rover was because she didn't want to listen. She didn't want to change. And she still managed to sorta get what she wanted in an appropriately bittersweet way. But her return ruins all of that. Instead, we'll have a different overseer show up who will play a key role in the conflict involving the next region, the High Roy. So yeah, overall, the main story quest of Rinascita from 2.0 to 2.7 was alright. It had its highs, but also a few too many lows. The story needed more time to cook and a better pace to cook at, but considering how many patches it took to tell the story in Rinascita as opposed to Jinzhou, this was definitely a huge improvement. And while I know this video won't change Kuro's plans for Lahai Roy barring a miracle, I still hope to see them improve upon and fix many of the grievances I have, like making sure there's steady and consistent build-up for the main story quest. I don't need to constantly experience peak cinema moments, or have the story always one-up itself with each act, because that's just not sustainable. I just don't want to constantly be on a roller coaster of highs, always being followed by lows, always being followed by plateaus. The playable characters also shouldn't be forgotten the moment their banner is done, because there's a big problem now with main story quests being character banner focused, then forgetting the characters when their banner is over until they're conveniently needed again for the story. This is even worse for 4 stars who are just forgotten. The best way to solve this would be to stick with the core cast of characters for each region like white on rice. Have them show up in the world even if they're not in a quest. Have as many as you can be involved in event and companion quests. And instead of constantly interacting with NPCs we'll never see or hear from again, replace them with 4-star characters instead, or 5 stars if there's not enough. so we can at least be reminded that they still exist. All the region-specific characters need to be present while we're still in the region for the main story, so it's not so jarring when they suddenly reappear because they've been gone for a patch or 3. Cause rag on Genshin all you want, but at least their characters are not forgotten. We learn about and constantly interact with them both in and out of the region they're based in. They always feel relevant, even when they're not, and especially if they're meant to play some kind of role in the main quest. In addition, can we stop making female characters thirsty for Rover? I'm getting so tired of it. Like, why do almost all the female characters we meet now have to be either giggly or shy or flirty or way too comfortable towards Rover despite only knowing them for a few days? Have more variety, like Zani, Augusta, Chakuna, and Galbrena, who are all breaths of fresh air in the sea of estrogen. Cause I'm playing an action RPG for crying out loud, not a dating sim. And stop putting companion quest elements in the main story quest, and bring back companion quests. Cause I don't want to feel like I'm being forced to learn about a character just so the main story can progress. Also, the developers need to figure out what exactly a segue is supposed to be, cause I have no idea if they're meant to be filler, an interlude, or set up for the main quest. And I know as of 2.8, Kuro fixed some of the grievances I've had. The cinematic cutscenes no longer have stressful QuickTime events for dialogue choices, and on the rare occasion they do, there's plenty of time to read and make a decision. The skip button and pace control of dialogue are back as well. The new playable character, Chisa, is thankfully not thirsty for Rover, and is understandably shy cause poor girl never had a real friend until she got trapped in a death loop. Unfortunately, the main story quest still couldn't help itself and ended up turning what was supposed to be an intriguing mystery into a companion quest. Like, it's completely fine to learn about a character during the main quest, but not to the extent where it becomes a requirement if you want to continue the main story. And I really could have done without the little harem thing going on in the segue. But hey, Wuthering Waves still has so many more patches left and a lot more story to tell. And given Kuro's track record of actually listening to players and implementing their feedback, maybe one day all of my grievances will be addressed. Or maybe they won't, because I'm just some random neko on the internet who will keep playing this game anyway regardless of poor story progression and continual expansion of the harem. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Reminder that this is just my opinion and not a heavily researched senior thesis, so if there's anything wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comment section down below in a polite and civilized manner. Also, if there was something from the Rinascita main story quest that I didn't cover or you just wanted to talk about, you can do that in the comments section as well. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment if there's anything Wuwa related that you'd like me to talk about next. This is some random neko, going off to do my dailies now. Don't forget to keep calm, just meow, and may your polls be blessed.